Hi and welcome along. I'm the Gardener Ben and this is my rose hip masterclass. It's autumn here on the south coast of England and it's a really cold, blustery and very wet autumnal day, but here in the dining room I'm absolutely surrounded by loads and loads of beautiful, vibrant rose hips. All of these have been foraged from my garden, and the purpose of this video is to talk you through the different types of rose hips, the best plants that actually produce them, and of course what you can do with these beautiful things as we move towards the beginning of winter. If you're anything like me, you're looking to maximise the interest in your garden at every single turn, whether that's bringing pollinators into the garden or making it a haven for wildlife, and rose hips have absolutely everything for that. Let's get into it. This time last year, I actually produced a reel, a part of National Rose Month 2022. It was a reel or a short designed showcasing the different types of roses that actually produce the best rose hits. But this year, what I thought I would do is I pick them all together and bring them all together and talk you through each individual variety. There's some actually quite surprising ones in here that I'd like to share with you today, but my best for hips collection actually includes quite a lot of David Austin roses. The first of which is the Lar Ascending that made the list last year, Emily Bronte, Lady Emma Hamilton, Kew Gardens and its sister rose, Tottering by Gently, Septed Isle, Buttercup, the Wedgwood Rose, Dame Judi Dench and Desdemona. Those are the ones that appeared in last year's reel or short that produced the best hips, and those were my best for hips collection. But these ones here, there's actually one or two new ones here for you as well, and I thought I'd go through with you the different types of rose hips that actually produce. Now it's very difficult to identify these as soon as they're cut, so I've actually gone to the trouble today to actually label them all up for you. And what I thought I'd do is I'd start with the most surprising. This one here, I've never seen this rose by David Austin ever produce hips in the garden before, but look at these. These are absolutely enchanting. They almost look like a quince. Really large, really bulbous, very sort of russet orange in colour, much like a russet apple. These are actually off of the Princess Alexandra of Kent, and bearing in mind, if you know the Princess Alexandra of Kent as a flower, huge, large, really large flowers, almost 5 to 5.5 inches across. There's no wonder that she's producing hips of this size and this quality. These are absolutely extraordinarily beautiful. So this is the Princess Alexandra of Kent. Alongside her in the vase as well is a rose that's actually famed for its hips. It's had a particularly bad season this year because it's been so wet. I actually completely stripped the first flush of flowers off of it, deadheaded it, and now we're left with the second flush, but they've really struggled to set because it's been so wet. But this is actually the Climber by David Austin Roses. This one is Mulen Hills, and you can see lovely sort of pea-sized hips, really round and fat, plump, very orange in colour. So this one is Mulen Hills. Now, I'm going to move straight forward to this one. This one really captivated my attention earlier. This is a real surprise for me. I was not expecting this rose to produce hips at all. Nothing I'd seen on the internet said that this particular rose did anything like this. So when I was out in the garden foraging and I came across these, I was really shocked. Now, I love this old rambling rose, but for it to produce hips of this quality is absolutely astonishing. Another reason why sometimes it's best to be a little bit tardy with your tasks in the garden and not get quite so excited, because if I'd actually deadheaded this particular rambling rose very early in the season when it was supposed to have been done, I wouldn't have been blessed with this beautiful crop. I mean, they really are absolutely incredibly beautiful. This one is Ghislaine de Filigrande. Now, I always get myself into a right old tiswas when I say that. I'm sure there will be people in the comment section, I won't have the pronunciation of that quite right, but this one is Ghislaine de Filigrande. You can see the hips on this are really enchantingly beautiful, really very pretty indeed. I'm very proud of this one. Alongside it, not quite ripe unfortunately, A really good David Austin rose for producing hips. You can see these are struggling just to turn colour because the autumn has been so wet. This is the really ever so lovely Claire Austin, a fabulous short climbing rose for an obelisk, post or pillar, but realistically at the moment dripping in these hips. If we get a little bit more sunshine, if it ever stops raining on the south coast of England, I think we actually will get a really decent crop, but it's absolutely smothered in these really lovely bulbous hips just at the moment. One of the real standouts for producing reliable hips all of the time is this particular rose here. I'm actually going to leave the majority of this in the vase because it bit me as I set up this presentation earlier today, making it onto the very top of my best for hips collection. This one is actually the Lar Ascending. Really good all-round rose, fantastic for producing an informal hedge or a large standalone statement shrub, towering up to 5, 6, sometimes even onto 7 feet. Stop dead heading this rose somewhere in the end, towards the end of September, and you will be rewarded with these really beautiful hips. Out of all of the ones in front of me, I think the hips that are produced by the Lar Ascending are my favourite. These won't go red. These will stay the most incredible bright orange colour, so they really are incredibly interesting. Because they're produced in such numbers as well, you can cut these quite confidently, knowing that you're not really taking anybody's supper away from them, and you can bring them into the house and you can enjoy them at this time of year. So that one is the Lar Ascending. Alongside it in the vase is one that is famed for its hips. Now, unfortunately, its sister rose, the Kew Gardens, has been so wet in a certain part of the garden, it's failed to set any hips at all. But tottering by gently, you can see, is now ripening up really lovely, vibrant orange scarlet hips there. Some really big green ones still to come, but tottering by gently, a fantastic rose for bringing lovely interest to pollinators into the garden. Its sister rose, Kew Gardens, exactly the same. If we're still in this house this time next year, which I kind of hope that we won't be, because hopefully we'll be moving on, I do have plans to produce an entire border backed with Kew Gardens as the base colour, with punctuated with dozens of other roses, but Kew Gardens actually being the cohesive colour moving all the way through that border because the rose is so good. But this one is tottering by gently. Right, moving on. I actually popped this one onto my stories the other day and asked a silly question whether anybody could identify this particular rose by its wonderful hips, this unbelievable tangerine orange colour. This one is the Generous Gardener, and generous he is, flowering all the way through the summer and then producing these marvellous, look at them. They're like gumdrops. They're absolutely stunning. They are pumpkin in colour. Really enchantingly beautiful. Produced in large sprays. Once again, stop deadheading this climbing rose. And sometimes if your specimen gets particularly large and it's up high, you'll struggle to deadhead it anyway. So let it go in late September. The last few flowers, allow them to set hips, and you'll end up with those beautiful hips come this time of year. We're into November now. One that made it onto my best for hips collection last year, and a very underrated little rose. This tough little cookie not only withstands a salt wind, a poor soil, but also lack of water, and then rewards you at the end of the season with these incredible hips. This one is Scarra Fair. Absolutely perfect for growing on an exposed site or in a container or planter, maybe on a balcony where you may not be particularly good with your watering. It produces really lovely, loosely formed flowers which glow radiant with colour right in the centre. I say then rewarding you with really rather lovely hips at this time of year. So this one is Scarra Fair. Unfortunately, this particular rose hasn't really made it this year. Septed Isle had a fantastic first flush in June, absolutely dripping with flowers, and then unfortunately the weather hasn't really favoured this rose. To the back end of the season, it's now, the hips are there, but they're struggling really to ripen and struggling to swell. But this one is Septed Isle, a really good all-round rose. Last in this particular vase, unfortunately a discontinued rose here in the UK now, but widely available throughout the rest of the world. A very deep scarlet coloured rose. This one is Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And for those of you that follow along closely, you'll know that I've got this planted on the rose arch that I built with a bench underneath of it. And these hips are absolutely enchanting. I love the shape of these. They look like little hats. They're really, really beautiful. They got that sort of drop look to them. Very, very shiny, very bulbous and plump. They really are very attractive indeed. This is Tess of the D'Urbervilles. A little bit of an exchange of vases. Bear with me while we have a little bit of a shuffle about. Oh my goodness, this one is just so pretty. And one of the things that sometimes you just need to take a stand back and look at this. And this is an old rambling rose, one that comes highly recommended from me. Just look at these. They are incredible. They're like pomegranate seeds. They're absolutely stunning. And this particular plant is dripping in them. This is Bobby James, a rambling rose, an old rambling rose from the turn of the last century. This particular one is a monster of a plant, reaching around 35 feet high. It's not for the faint-hearted, but if you've got a large building or a fence, a larger expansive fence, or a barn, for instance, you want to cover, Bobby James is absolutely incredible for that kind of thing. Fast growing, vigorous and disease resistant. You're then rewarded. I'm going to bring them right in so you can see them. Look at them. They're so pretty. This is Bobby James, and it's currently dripping with these hips just at the moment. David Austin is famed for his first adaptation of the modern rose. This one was launched in 1961, and this is the ever so lovely Constance Spry, a once flowering climbing rose which produces a huge en masse show very late in June, a lovely sugar pink and highly fragranced with stunning golden stamens in the very centre. If you don't deadhead it and you leave it like I have, you will then be rewarded by these beautiful hips. Very similar to what we looked at just a second ago. Tess of the D'Urbervilles, that lovely sort of gumdrop shape to them. Really pretty. This one is Constance Spry. I really like this particular climbing rose, although I think I need to go back and actually refilm my review of this one. I confess, when I filmed the personal review for Strawberry Hill, I was incredibly tired. I remember the day very well in 2002. It was right at the very end of National Rose Month, and I don't think I did this particular rose a huge service. I think it needs me to revisit it. But this one is Strawberry Hill. It's had a fantastic season this year, really enjoying the hot, dry start to the summer. And then there's a really horrible, wet, windy and turbulent time we've had towards the back end of the year. It hasn't minded it at all, and has continued to march forward with wave and wave after flower. And you can see that Strawberry Hill is producing really very reasonable hips indeed. Right, one more vase to bring you. There's a surprise in this vase as well. Let's move these away and give myself a little bit of space. Right. Dame Judi Dench does produce really lovely hips, but hasn't as of yet ripened them. So that's one in this particular vase. I'm leaving the surprise for right at the end. Unfortunately, Buttercup suffering the same thing as a lot of the other roses. This single, or it's not a single, it's a slightly double flower, radiant with actual colour, glowing gold and smelling of pollen and honey. It's a really enchanting small climber or large shrub, which is an informal habit, producing really lovely hips. You can see once these do ripen, these will be absolutely splendid. But this one is Buttercup. And surprise, I've never ever had hips on this rose before, but whilst foraging in the garden to bring this collection together for you, I found these on a plant and I thought, goodness me, I've never seen these before. This is actually Gentle Hermione. I've always been so good at deadheading the plant, I've never left it. Obviously the season here has dragged on well into the end of October and into November, and you can see that Gentle Hermione, if left undeadheaded, will actually produce really good hips indeed. So they are absolutely beautiful. So leaving those out in the garden for the birds. Now, rose hips have many uses. I don't know if you know, but all the roses are actually related to the apple and crabapple family. So all of the rose hips around me are actually edible. I know a lot of us see red especially as a danger colour, but all rose hips are actually edible, and you shouldn't be afraid of trying them. The best thing for you to do, you can eat them fresh, or you can turn them into a multitude of different things. If you want to eat them fresh, I need to choose one here so I can actually show you. Let's choose a nice ripe one off of here. The best way of actually eating them is to pick them from the plant, take them between your forefinger and your thumb, and simply squeeze, and this one's actually going to be hard, it's not going to do it for me, that's going to show me up, isn't it? You squeeze them between your forefinger and your thumb, and the actual pulp will come out, leaving the seeds inside. The pulp is really very, very sweet. It's very floral in its taste and texture, slightly tart. You'll compare it to probably a citrus taste when you actually eat it. Avoid eating the seeds if you can, because they are quite hairy and they might actually irritate you. It's actually what they use for itching powder, to create itching powder. But the actual whole rose hip itself is actually edible. You could pop that in your mouth if you wanted to and eat the entire thing. They are an amazing source of antioxidants. They are absolutely packed with vitamin C and vitamin A. And if you take them in controlled amounts, for instance, if you make yourself a tea or you make yourself a jam, they're really, really good for your all-round health. If you suffer with a slow digestive system, taking in large amounts of rose hips tea can help you naturally move through your bowels. And if you wanted to take a rose hip tea regularly, the benefits are really, really very good indeed. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. So if you suffer with rheumatoid arthritis, if you suffer with any inflammatory condition, stiffness and joint pain, it's really good for alleviating naturally all of those different types of things. And all you need to do to make yourself a rose hip tea, it really is very simple. Pick yourself a collection of rose hips, wash them, get them nice and clean, and then pop them into the oven for around 2, 3 or 4 hours just to dry them out. Once they're dry and stable, you can pop them into a glass jar, and as and when you need them, you just need to make yourself a tea. So take from your jar of rose hips between 4 and 8 rose hips and pop them into a mug. Now this is not rose hip tea, this is actually a cup of tea, but pop them into a normal mug, add hot water and allow them to steep for up to 10 minutes. Strain the actual rose hips out and enjoy your tea. You'll find it sweet but taut, again with notes that are very, very floral and that remind you of citrus. But it's a really, really good source of vitamin C, vitamin A, and packed with antioxidants. So if this food crisis continues and you're struggling to pay, for instance, blueberries, rose hips might be a really good adaptation. You can also bake them into bread. Now, what I suggest you do if you plan to do this, and if you treat them very much like an olive, something like that, if you were going to put some olives into bread, again, do the same. Go out, forage your rose hips, wash your rose hips, and then cut them open. Split each rose hip in half, scoop out the seeds, much like you would do a vanilla pod, but discard the seeds. And then you can cook them into a bread if you wanted to, or into a cake if you wanted to, if you were doing a floral cake with rose hips and maybe lavender, really, really good. But if you wanted to bake them into a bread, something like a focaccia, even so much as a sourdough would take them quite well as well. But they really do add a really nice thing. You could also sprinkle them on the top as well. You can turn them into jam and jelly, and they also mix well with other flavours. So for instance, if you haven't got quite enough blackberries or blueberries, or maybe you've had too many blackberries and blueberries and you're fed up of making boring blackcurrant and blueberry jam, what you could do is you can add a small amount of rose hips. Again, prepare them in exactly the same way. Forage them from the garden or from outside in the countryside. Take them home, wash them, cut them open, scoop out the seeds and discard them, and then you can boil them into an actual jam and add them to other jams. So if you're making a strawberry jam or an apple jam, anything like that, you can add small amounts of rose hips just to add that lovely, really, really floral citrus edge that they bring into it. Again, an amazing source of natural antioxidants and anti-inflammatories packed with vitamin A and vitamin C. So really, really very good for you. If you do happen to do that and you're boiling the rose hips to turn them into something like a jam or a jelly, please be aware that the boiling process is going to actually remove an awful lot of the vitamin C. And once you discard a lot of your liquid, consider actually taking that as a tea rather than throwing it away and popping it down the drain. There is a huge amount to take on board for you here as far as eating rose hips are concerned, but the other thing that I absolutely love doing at this time of year is actually bringing them into the house, much as I have done with the rose hips that are in front of me. You can use them in all manner of floral arrangements, whether you're dressing your fireplace like I do for the festive season over the coming weeks, whether you're producing yourself a holiday wreath to pop on the front or back door, or maybe your outside gate. A really great way of avoiding using plastics or bows or ribbon, all of those kind of things. You can actually place rose hips directly into that and they'll last all the way through the season. The other wonderful thing, as I mentioned earlier, they are absolutely fabulous for wildlife. I'm just going to grab hold of Bobby James again here. I leave all of these type of things that I don't pick for the house out in the garden at this time of year. I leave all of my perennials standing well until the very end of December and into the first and second weeks of January. And I do that for a reason. We have so many small wild birds in the garden here. Everything from chaffinches to wrens, bullfinches, blue tits, all of those tiny little birds absolutely adore rose hips. And as these start to break down, you might look at them and think, oh, they're perfectly ripe. Why aren't the birds touching them? Well, they eat everything in order. As everything comes to its very, very peak, they'll eat everything. You'll quite often see an ivy plant or bush in the season that will be absolutely covered with pigeons, and they know exactly when these things are perfectly ripe and when it's best to eat them. So they may look perfectly ripe to you, but the birds will very much identify when these are ready to eat. And as soon as they get to that point where there's a little bit of give, when you pinch them between your forefinger and your thumb, they're starting to go soft. Maybe the moisture started to make them look like they're slightly rotten and ruined to you. The birds will absolutely feast on them. Rather than putting out peanuts and seeds for your birds, simply leave these on the plants for the birds to feast on. If you do want to go ahead with your winter and autumn pruning, consider not discarding these kind of things and actually tie them into large bundles and just simply hang them on your bird feeders or next to your bird tables for the smaller birds to come and eat. They are absolutely packed with nutritional value for the birds, and they will really, really love it as well. Another thing you can consider doing with rose hips is actually harvesting the seeds and having a go at growing some of your own plants. Now, full disclosure on this one, it takes an awfully long time to grow a rose. You have to be aware that you're growing a rose on its own rootstock because it's going to be true to its parent with its rootstock, but also you have no idea what the cross-pollination came from. You might be thinking, oh, I've taken a hip, for instance, on this one off of Constance Spry. I'm going to grow myself cheaply a new Constance Spry, but that's not necessarily the case. The pollen that actually pollinated this hip could have come from all manner of different things. So you've actually got a rose hybrid that you're actually going to grow. And if you do want to grow them, all you need to do is crack open these hips, spoon out the seeds and pop them into some water for a couple of days just to soften them up, and then sow them like you would do any other plant. And in several years, you might find yourself with a very strange but very interesting new variety. So much to take on with the particular rose hips. I'm just going to go through my notes to make sure that we've actually covered everything for you. I think that's just about everything. I hope you've enjoyed today's showcase of these absolutely amazing rose hips. Remember, all rose hips are edible. So if you see some out and about and you fancy giving them a try, don't hesitate to give them a little bit of a wash when you get home and try them. The taste is really, really quite unusual indeed, and they're incredibly good for you. I hope to see you all again soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.